1981's Ghost Story, directed by John Irvin and based on the novel by Peter Straub, is a film made in the style of the 1940s and aimed at an audience that existed at the height of the slasher film craze that lasted from 1978 to 1984. And because of this alone, it is a really strange movie. It centers on the Chowder Society, a group of retired men tied together by a dark secret, who gather together on chilly winter evenings to share ghost stories by the fire while sipping nightcaps. And what makes this movie really special, and is the main reason that I think it should be remembered, is that the four men who make up the Chowder Society are portrayed by John Houseman, Melvyn Douglas, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and Fred Astaire. Ghost Story was actually the last film appearance of Astaire, Fairbanks Jr., and Douglas, and I think in a way that's really fitting, because the film focuses on a group of men whose lives currently revolve around who they once were before, and how the past still haunts them and affects them to this day. It is a ghost story about real ghosts, but also the metaphorical ones as well that we make out of our past. The members of the society were people of importance in their heyday. One was a businessman, the other's a doctor, a lawyer, a mayor. But as it happens to us all, age caught up with them and the men fell into obscurity, becoming ghosts of their former selves, telling stories to each other of when they were young to comfort themselves. And it is in this light that the film has one of the best casts in any horror movie ever, because the cast members themselves tie thematically directly into the main elements that drive the story. At this point, Fred Astaire had not been culturally relevant since the late 50s. Melvyn Douglas had been doing made-for-TV movies almost exclusively for 20 years. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. had been in nearly 100 movies, but almost all of them had been in the 1920s and 1930s. John Houseman was the only member of the group who had been consistently working in the decade leading up to this film being made, but it is undeniable that Houseman's best work had been long behind him on films like Citizen Kane and They Live by Night. And so you have these men, who are practically playing themselves, who are haunted by the ghost of their pasts, and the movie is brilliant for that. But you can't have a movie called Ghost Story that doesn't have any ghosts in it. And the way the ghosts are implemented here is another bridge to a time-long past in film history. And in a way, this movie acts in a connecting fashion to old Hollywood horror. The ghost here, played wonderfully by Alice Krige, who would later go on to be known for portraying the Borg Queen in First Contact, is filmed like a ghost would have been in an old Hollywood horror film. You see, a lot of scares in horror before the late 60s and early 70s would play out in pretty similar ways, where a character would slowly creep up on something, and the camera would pan around to just reveal a scary face. The most famous example of this being Psycho, when Lila is in the basement and slowly creeps up on the chair where Mrs. Bates is sitting, when the chair spins around to reveal the real scary face of Norman Bates' mother. And the same effects are done here, where you will have characters doing something, the music will build, and the camera will spin quickly to show a disfigured and messed up face. It happens a lot in the movie, but I think it's really purposeful and isn't being used here as a cheap jump scare gimmick, because it is instead being used as a callback to the types of movies that would have scared these men when they were young. Because if you were to take these clips, switch them to black and white, and then pump up the contrast to where there were a lot of harsh blacks on the screen, you would have scenes that were perfectly executing the style of filmmaking that was popular in a lot of early horror. And I think the subtlety of bringing back that style in the era of Halloween and Friday the 13th is a really brave and stylish thing to do. The movie isn't without its faults though, which is unfortunate. Although I haven't read the book that is based on, I have heard that the movie thoroughly ignores large sections of it, and that if you read the book first, you won't like what they do with it in the movie. I can excuse that for the most part though, seeing as there are plenty of great films based on great books, like The Shining, that are different beasts entirely, that use the book as a jumping off point to take the same plot into a different story direction. But the main thing that really holds this film back is the comically bad score. The music in this film is cartoonish and destroys all mood created by the actors, writers, director, and editor. The scares in this movie don't work at all, because instead of building tension with the music, it is constantly going on really loudly, and the film would be better suited if there just wasn't music there at all compared to what is there now. It's kinda hard to describe what I mean exactly, so I'm actually just gonna play a small clip from the film here to demonstrate. In this shot, the film is building to one of the first big scares, as this man walks slowly to a bridge that he'll encounter a ghost on. Listen to the audio here, and you'll see how the music completely removes all tension that should be here. It's too loud, and ruins a large part of the viewing experience. I would actually be really interested to see what the film would look like if someone removed the existing score and placed a more accurate one in its place, because I think an experiment like this could make it a much more enjoyable film to watch. I think the argument could probably be made that composer Philip Sard was trying to emulate the sound of horror from decades past, as at times it does bear a striking resemblance to Bernard Herrmann's work with Alfred Hitchcock. But if this is the case, then I feel it was either a misstep or not handled properly. The score is actually one of the main reasons why this video is not labeled "Why You Should Watch Ghost Story," because I think there's a few things here that just haven't aged so well and would turn off a lot of viewers that aren't accustomed to old horror. But I do still think that the film should be known, that it should be remembered as a part of the history of horror. And while I don't see the film as a classic, I think it is important because of the intent and the ambition that the film set out to be, rather than what it ended up being. Because four men that each greatly affected the landscape of film and culture for decades decided that this story would be the capstone of their legacy. That all of their life events and accomplishments would be sum totaled and closed off with the tale of four old men combating their age and the ghosts of their own making. And that's something that I think should be remembered and known about, as at the very least, it is a unique event in the vast landscape of horror. And at the very most, it was how four men in the twilight of their lives decided that they wanted to be remembered, and that was the story they wanted to tell together at the end of their own individual stories. And in a way, by taking their legacies into their hands and making this movie together, they showed that ghosts can be defeated, and that the only way to move forward in life is to look back and confront your demons head on, instead of hiding them away from the world. And if that's the message that they wanted to go out on, then I think that's admirable, and is a message that we could all take to heart when dealing with our own ghosts from our own pasts.
I'll look around until I